Okay, so I just want to check out before we start officially. It's really weird to have you all sit in different places, so that's not making a good group. So I'm not sure why you're doing that, but we're just going to be doing it that way.
You want us to move up or something like that?
I was just going to do it now because we are kind of out of time. I want to discuss the readings just before we actually start. I'd like to discuss the readings for next time. It's just 8 o'clock now. I got an email that it is too much reading, it's too much stuff, and that some people are not coming because they feel they're not prepared, so that's not really what the intention was. I didn't feel it was too much reading for today, but for next time it is actually a lot because we have both we have a novel by Jabotinsky, we have a volume of short stories by Babel that are not easy, and I also assigned, because we are always doing the double track, I also assigned a volume of short stories by Ivan Bunin, who was the first Russian to get the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1933. He's actually he's a wonderful writer. He's not easy. His stylistic model was Flaubert. He's extraordinary in Russia. It's hard for him to sort of like get translated because the quality, as Jenna probably know, and Lenny probably know, the quality of the language is extraordinary. There's very little Jewish content in his work, but he's really the successor, I would say, to both Tolstoy and to Chekhov. And for that reason, I had assigned him because we're always doing a double track. There is an advantage. I'm suggesting that we're not reading Bunin. I'm suggesting now that we'll be focusing on Jabotinsky and on Babel, and that instead of Bunin, because this Jewish content is so slight, and I was just going to do a literary track, but because we will already be meeting in 4 weeks, and you do have a full novel to read, and you do have the Babel to read, and I do want you to have some idea, do a little bit of research on the Kishinev pogrom, because we're starting next time, 1903, and we're going all the way to the revolution, and we're starting Stalinism, and we'll be looking into the Civil War of the 1920s, which is a very important period. So it's a lot. So I feel that I really will be overloading you doing Bunin. So I'm going to cut the Bunin. Okay. Instead, before I take it, I will offer that we're looking at Bialik's City of Slaughter. So you get a poem. City of Slaughter was the first really nationally famous poem in Hebrew. There's a version of it in Yiddish, and there is a reading of it in Yiddish actually on YouTube. So that's what I'm suggesting. Okay, please. You want to say something? For next time, I assigned Save Jabotinsky, his novel of 1895, and a book of stories, the collected stories by Isaac Babel. In addition, I had assigned a volume of stories by Ivan Bunin, and I am now saying we will not read Bunin so that we can focus entirely. I'm sorry, Leonid, I know this is a favorite writer of yours, but we're not going to do it. I could also have done Platonovic. We're not going to be doing it. Eventually, we will be doing it, but not now. Maybe in connection. We're doing the Proust course. There would be an opportunity to look at Bunin because he lived in Paris for a while, and it is a possibility. Okay, so I'm saying for next time, Zev Jabotinsky, please do a little bit of research on the Kishinev pogrom of 1903 and focus on the period 1903 to the beginning of the Civil War 1921, which will also mean that you have to look a little bit into the Russian Revolution. 2 days ago it was the 99th anniversary of the revolution, and it's no longer obviously a holiday. So that's what I'm suggesting. Okay with that? No Bunin? Okay, all clear? What we're doing. Okay, so now we're going to start our course for today. So we're in session 3. It's really hard to keep track of what we have been doing so far. We have just a little bit of a review. Salikov and Sholonyak and Abramovich read 2 novels. We found out that the characters in those novels, even though they live in very different societies, feel cooped up, they feel stifled, they feel static, they feel constrained. What was interesting about reading those two novels, one written in Russian society, one set in and written in Jewish society, was that the reaction to the feeling of stifledness, to the feeling of cooped up, to the feeling of no purpose, was the exact opposite. We found that the Golombiev characters were focusing inside, and we're wilting, and we're withering, and we're deteriorating because they had no purpose, whereas the reaction of Benjamin and his group was to move out, to do something, to get very active. It was very interesting. Same novel, same period, different societies, totally different reaction to the idea of feeling completely stifled. We then had, in session 2, we read 4 writers, a little bit less of Kovna, and we were beginning to get a profile of the perception of the Jew in Russian society, which was astonishing because even though Turgenev and Dostoevsky were very different kinds of writers, we were getting a very similar profile of the perception of the Jews, which was as a greedy, disloyal, physically weak, cowardly, unable to serve as a soldier in the Russian army, ridiculous, self-enclosed, shrewd, sentimental, fearful, unmanly, without interest in honor. And you can, add whatever other things that we saw. We saw somebody who was different, one writer who was different, and that was Leskov. Now, if you think about it socially, what we have discussed was that both Turgenev and Dostoevsky very keenly were aware that they were from the noble class. Leskov was not, and was very proud of that, and showed it also in the way that he dressed. So, and for him, he had a different relationship with Jews, and you remember that in 1884 he wrote this great essay on the Jewish question. So he was different, and his argument was, the Jews are not dangerous to the Russian economy. That was his major argument. Chill out, the Jews do not want to convert you, the Jews will not abuse you, and they're good for the Russian economy. Okay, so today we are reading 3 writers. We will be looking at the social effects of rise of anti-Judaism and the social effects of the situation of the Jews, so the effects on society. 3 writers, Ginsberg, Chekhov, and Sholem Aleichem. These are our 2 guys. As you were reading, probably, I found Chekhov and Sholem Aleichem, they are soulmates. Almost, I found them very similar in many ways. And looking at that, I would like to start our course, though, however, tonight, our session tonight with Shaul Ginsberg. And did you look him up a little bit? You know who he is? So I'm not talking now about the drama of Slavuta. Let me first ask you my macro question. I'm sorry that the room is so big. Did you read it? Did you finish it? The drama of Slavuta? Yes. Okay, what did you think? What was your reading experience? And then I'll talk a little bit about who this guy was, and then we're going to take this thing apart for about 20 minutes before we go into the Chekhov stories. What was your thing? What was your reaction? How long did you want to not finish it? Did you? Can you just say something?
I discussed it a little bit with Alex.
Yeah.
My opinion, it should be a stronger word than the drama of Slavuta. It should be the calamity or the catastrophe or something.
The catastrophe of Slavuta, the drama of Slavuta,
I
okay.
think the drama is a little too...
Okay, so it was really hard going. It was really hard. It was emotionally hard. Hey, Michael, I don't know what kind, you want to come join us?
No, I was...
Okay. It was hard to read because it was emotionally challenging. What's the key here? Why was it emotionally so challenging?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah. Just a follow-up question.
I think it was emotionally challenging because I perceived the Jews of this community as being framed, and they had 3 forces that were working against them. The priests and the Russian...
Okay, hold this. This is exactly what we want to do. Okay, good. Excellent. That is what I want to do. Before we go and look at, because the framing is precisely right and the 4 different forces, Beverly, you could give this course yourself. All right, so this is precisely right. We're going to go look at that. I want to, before we go into that, before we go into context, there is still another context to that story. Before we go into the inner dynamics, Charles Ginsburg actually wrote this piece just before he died in 1937. He was extraordinary. He's of significance to Shalom Aleichem. He graduated with a law degree in 1891 from St. Petersburg, which means that he was an assimilated Jew. If he got to go to St. Petersburg University, that already tells you something about his status. That tells you something about his education. He starts writing for Voskot, which was an extraordinary literary journal in St. Petersburg, and then he does something extraordinary that whenever you go to a Yiddish music concert, you will hear his work, because he started with Pesach Marek, he edited the first collection of Yiddish folk songs. It was called Yevreysky Pesni v Rossii, Jewish folk songs in Russia, and it is the starting collection of Yiddish folk songs. That was Charles Ginsburg's work. So he was steeped both in the Russian intellectual community as well as being interested in Yiddish folklore. And then he does the one thing that saved Shalom Aleichem's life, which was that he started in 1903 a Yiddish newspaper. At that point, all Yiddish newspapers had ceased to exist. Shalom Aleichem was without any income, and suddenly our Charles Ginsburg starts a Yiddish newspaper, gets permission to start a Yiddish newspaper in St. Petersburg, and Shalom Aleichem begins to write. Some of the stories, the Eisenbahngeschichte that you were reading for today, were published in that newspaper. The stories of 1902 and the stories of 1903. In 1908, he quits as editor because there's an enormous decline in the paper. He cannot financially afford it anymore, and he begins to do work that we are still appreciating, because he was able to go into the Tsarist archives and do the kind of research that led to pieces like the drama of Slavuta. So he goes into the archives, obviously after 1918. He becomes a professor of history. In 1930, he goes to Paris, and from there he moves to New York. And then in 1937, he publishes 3 volumes of historical works. So the drama of Slavuta appears in 1937. What was the big event that was written up that was bothering the Jews on the left in 1937? Being framed. I cannot hear you.
The physician trial?
No, that is later, 1953. Actually 1952, but you're on the right track. The Purge trials in Moscow. Okay? So the Purge trials, so the drama of Slavuta appeared in little bits and pieces, in installments. That is why it is so weird. So it's not one, you feel it at every beginning of every chapter, he is repeating what he just said. That is due to the book not being really edited, but the drama of Slavuta appeared in bits and pieces in the forward, and this is what it looked like, just like that. So it says up there, I use my glasses, I can actually read it. Okay, die berühmte Geschichte mit dem Volvo gegen die Jiden von Slavuta. That's what it says. So this is the first installment. And on the front page of that paper, it is in the Sunday supplement, in the literary Sunday supplement of the forward, is where this series of essays appears. And on the front page, you have the write-up of the Purge trials in Moscow. So our first context really is that being trained. So where Stalin tries to get rid of all the old Bolsheviks, okay, between 1936 and 1938, he put a lot of the old guard, the old Bolsheviks who had been participating with Lenin in the Russian Revolution of 1918 and had been building up the Bolshevik party. They were put on trial. They were showcase trials. They were being framed, and a lot of them were executed. And that bothered a lot of the Jews who were here because they were a part of the Communist Party, and they felt that was not the right thing to do, obviously. Okay, so that is the outer context. I just wanted to show you a little bit of the work that was published. That is in 18, I'm sorry you cannot really see it so well, it's in 1810 Zohar, produced by the Shapira brothers. I mean, it was absolutely beautiful books. This is what it looks in the inside, is Vayikra, Zohar, and Vayikra, and that is what the books looked a little bit later in 1866, the Trey Song. Okay, now, now I'm back to New Beverly. Okay, so what is so difficult about this book? What is the framing? What we're really getting here is, for the first time, we're getting an inside view of how it happened that the anti-Jewish thoughts were forming in the Russian government. The Russian government sitting in St. Petersburg didn't really know any Jews. The civil servants who were making the laws and who were thinking about the status of the Jews didn't know any Jews. Those were people who were raised within Russian societies. And I think what is so difficult in reading this book is that we're beginning to understand that the Russian government, the Tsarist government, got its ideas not just out of books, but that they were purveyed by the Jews. That's what's and that they were purveyed by the Jews. And that is where the four trajectories are now coming in. So we're getting 3 case studies, because it's not just this Lavuta study that we're getting. We're getting the case study of the peasant who gets a piece of the tongue cut off, and we're getting the case study of the boy who can't urinate because whatever, and that is then the magic of the Jews, and we're getting the Slavuta case. So we're getting 3 case studies really, in which 2 were defeated, and in one the people who were accused were punished. What's the trajectory? What do we learn? What are the forces that helped to gestate, can I say, to shape the anti-Jewish attitudes of the Russian government? What happens? Okay, Beverly, I'm sorry that I had to interrupt you first, but I wanted to get the context in.
The Russian priest.
The Russian priest. Okay, so we're very clear. So I'm not going to move this forward a little bit because I want to make some notes here. I'm sorry, we don't really need to see the screen right now.
The Greek Orthodox priest.
All right, so we have the priest. And how does it work? Now, it's not just the priest. It's one. So we have, and he says it at the very beginning, we have a deep running course of anti-Jewish feeling in Russian Orthodoxy. So that we know. Okay, so, and that is actually something that when Clear talks about his, the general science. Okay, so we have that. This is our first thing. So there's a fundamental, basic sense of anti-Jewish sentiment among Russian Orthodoxy. So I'm going to abbreviate that, I'm just going to put priest on it, okay? Priest. Priest. What's next? What happens next? That's not the only thing.
The author went into a long course, there was a translator now. The author went into a long discourse about the struggles between the Mitnagdim and the
yeah, okay, so our number one thing is the priest. Could we just trace the trajectory of what happens? Okay, so there's a priest, but then what happens? 2 priests, okay? Let's go if you go look at your first case study, which is, because it's very easy, the guy with the tongue. Let's take the boy who pees, okay, in 1834, July 1834, because that's actually really clear. Okay, you get 2 priests, and they say, hey, if the guy can't pee, okay, it's got to be the magic of the Jews. Okay, so that stays in the fold. How does this get to the Tsar? That's how you need to know. You need to know the pathways by which things move. Okay, so we get 2 priests, and they say to the peasant family, okay, it's the magic of the Jews. What happens? The But actually the peasants say that. The priests get when actually the peasants say that. So we have the peasant folklore that the Jews are bad. The Jews are in line with the devil. They tell the priest tells the archbishop, okay? The archbishop reports it to St. Petersburg. That's how it goes. The archbishop has a direct line to Tsar Nikolai.
Well, actually, there was the physician first.
I cannot hear you.
There was first a physician that intervened, and the Jews were not involved at the very beginning.
We're not involved, right?
Right.
Okay.
And then the physician came in and solved the minor surgical issue, and then the priest initiated
Right.
the
Okay,
stuff.
so that also, okay, that's the basis. Okay, now we're at Tsar Nikolai. And then what does Tsar Nikolai do? Tsar Nikolai gets a very important guy involved, and that is Graf Benkendorf. Oh, no, sorry, this is not really working. Much better. Okay, our Graf Benkendorf, he is a key figure. Graf Benkendorf is the head of the secret police. In fact, he's the inventor of the secret police. Okay? And the secret police guy then sends in a guy by the name, he is, okay, so peasants, priests, archbishop, Tsar Nikolai. Tsar Nikolai goes to Graf Benkendorf. Graf Benkendorf is the head of the 3rd Division. Head of 3rd Division says, get something Slavuta. He's never heard of Slavuta. He doesn't know what Slavuta is. What does he do? Next step?
He appoints a commission.
He sends somebody. He sends somebody. And he sends a 25-year-old, a 22-year-old guy, okay, whose name is Vasiliev or something like that. Yeah, Vasiliev, something, Alexander. Okay, Vasiliev. Okay, now, okay, so we have here national religious anti-Judaism. We have the narrow-mindedness of the Tsar. We have a functionary in Graf Benkendorf who actually wasn't a bad guy. I put him up there. He's kind of like a German guy. There's a lot of German-Russian connections. Okay, Benkendorf sends Vasiliev, and that is crucial. And Vasiliev goes down to Slavuta, and then what happens? And we're going to put in the Mitnaki, the Hasidim, at another moment. Now Vasiliev goes down.
He's taken under the wings of the priest. He's taken under the wings of the priest. And the priest...
Right, but you have to have a motive. What's his motive? What is his motive?
He wants to buy
He is a young guy. He wants to make his mark. Okay, he wants to have a career. You see how many elements, each a little bit, come together. He wants to build a career. Okay, and his interest is, so what's his thinking? How can he build a career? Okay, you're Vasiliev now. You're 25, you're in Slavuta. You want to impress your guy Benkendorf because you want to go make it. What are you going to do? What are you going to use? Okay, you got to think about Tsar Nikolai was interested in that. What's this Tsar like? And you know he doesn't like the Jews. And that's how he meets up with the priest. So as he is going down, he isn't going down to Slavuta directly. He stops in Berdicha, he stops in Zhitomir, he collects information. Okay? And he gets a sense that there is cooking in Russian Orthodoxy, and goes back to the priests. Okay? That there is an anti-Jewishness brewing. Okay? And he locks into that. And from there it goes. Good, that is one trajectory. Now, we need to have, and now we go to the case of Slavuta. We have, unfortunately, a separate, that's one trajectory. You dock onto the popular anti-Jewishness, anti-Jewish sentiment, anti-Judaism that is cooking in Russian Orthodoxy. Okay. That's people who have like a little bit of information. What's the second trajectory? The second thing that arrives up with Graf Benkendorf. Okay.
Well, the apostate Jews and the informing Jews.
That's right. So for a very long time, okay, we had, that is beginning in the early 19th century with the rise of the power of the Baal Shem Tov, we had inimicality, and we will need that. I think when you read the first story in Sholem Aleichem, the couple who is married to each other and they're the same but they're competitors, have you thought about that that could be an allegory of some kind? Okay, we're talking about that allegory now. Have you thought about that? Okay, because it's not everything that Sholem Aleichem writes. Sure, it looks like realism. But, you know, he's a student of our guy Mendele. He's his closest disciple. He adores him. He's his anical. That's who he is. So that could be an allegory. We're talking about that now. So there was an inimicality between the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim. And what did the Mitnagdim do? Sure, denunciations, okay? They were writing, obviously you read it, and they were furnishing at an enormous rate the Russian government with misinformation about the Jews. I mean, I'm not making a case for the Tsarist regime, I'm really not. But if you are an official and you're sitting in St. Petersburg and you're getting essay after essay about the devilishness of the Jews, at some point you say to yourself, where there's smoke, there's fire. Okay, so we have this other trajectory which is furnished by the Jews. So we have the Mitnagdim complaining, you know, the Hasidim weren't any better. So, I mean, they wrote less, but they did also. So we have, how do you call this, slander? We have slanderous information there. So what is ours, and what's our second? The second source of misinformation?
Apostates. What would become apostates?
Masculine, secular.
The masculine, okay, that's number 3. Okay, that's number 2. Okay, so we got the Mitnagdim and the Hasidim. We got the masculine, who also were down on the Hasidim, and we just got the plain informers. I mean, informing on someone, for whatever reason it was, is huge business. Why is that? Now you got to think back to what we're talking about the pale. Informing, and I would say, and I mean, Jean probably can talk to that, we're talking about the generation of generating the creation of a culture that went all the way, I would say, into the Soviet period. Not trusting anyone. When I talk to Virginia, when I talk to Leonid, living in the Soviet Union, not being able to trust anyone, that was that culture that you experienced? And then you don't even know who those friends are. I would say that we are looking right now at the birth of a central element in Soviet culture, in Russian culture, which is you cannot trust anyone, because anyone could have a financial motive, it's usually a financial motive, to betray you. The sense of betrayal, and that too is a theme in Shalom Aleichem, the betrayal, when you are absolutely least expecting it. So we have, unfortunately, we have the regular and the converts and the regular informers. And they inform out of meanness, out of ordinariness, out of careerism, out of wanting to have power, you name the motives. So you could see that you are having a very dangerous mix of careerism, of established anti-Jewishness, of people being very far away in St. Petersburg, not being able to judge what it really is the reality on the ground, and very smart Jews furnishing the government with misinformation. And that stuff is cooking in the 1880s and leads to a really poisonous atmosphere for the Jews. And yet, you have Jews like Shaul Ginsburg who managed to go to St. Petersburg University and live a normal life. So that was my point about the drama of Slavuta. Let's move to, is okay? And we move on to, okay, so now I want to move on to Chekhov, who, who was not affected by anti-Semitism at all. It was absolutely astonishing. And I think that has something to do with one, as you can see, Sholem Aleichem and Chekhov exactly contemporary. Chekhov got a little bit sick earlier. Both of them had tuberculosis, died of tuberculosis. Chekhov a little bit earlier, 1862, 1904. It's really important, and I want to spend, I know that you are itching to get to the literary things, but it is really important that we just review what is happening between 1881. This is the point when both Chekhov and Sholem Aleichem are writing their first stories and the time they die. So between what's happening between, or actually we're going to go to 1903 because we do after Kishinev next time. What was happening? You have it actually in the introduction to the railroad stories, but it's important to review that. So in 1881, the Tsar gets shot, and we have an immediate outbreak of pogroms. By 1882, the May laws are being proclaimed. What are the May laws? Very important. It is the last chapter, the last Tepe story. Tepe goes to Eretz Yisrael. Lech Lecha, actually. The Tepe story, Lech Lecha, is about that. What are the May laws? All of a sudden, because I told you that every person in Russian society is part of an estate, so the Jews were always part of the merchant estates, so they were townspeople, and so you are not allowed to settle in community in rural communities, and all of us that it was tolerated. And the May laws are that certain rural areas are closed for Jews, which caused an enormous upheaval. People had to get off the rural settlements and move into the cities in overcrowded tenements, and that's what the May laws were, and that led to enormous resentment. You have intense pogroms in 1883, which is when Abramovich gets married. You have pogrom in Nizhny Novgorod in 1884. You have intense quota system, numerous clauses in 1887. No one can go to school. Only 10% of study places are for Jews, even though they are totally upwardly mobile, which means they have no possibility at all to advance anywhere. That too is a theme in Sholem Aleichem. He picks that up in the railroad stories. In 1890, again, a reclassification of towns and places where Jews cannot live. And then in 1891, and that will be part of our theme in Odessa, 20,000 Jews are expelled from Moscow. Among them, Simon Dubnov, who will be moving to Odessa, and that's a boon for Odessa because Odessa becomes a Jewish intellectual center in 1891 because Jewish intellectuals are moving from Moscow down to Odessa. And then in 1894, very strangely, so if you became Russified, you could change your Jewish name, but now you're no longer allowed, which is why most of you who have Russian ancestors who still have Jewish names. More pogroms, and then in 1903, the pogrom in Kishinev, which raised an enormous outcry. And this is actually fascinating. So you remember that we started with Saltykov being on one side and Mendeley Moskworm being on the other side, and I said the two come on together. In 1903, with the pogroms in Kishinev, was the one time when Russian writers were taking the part of the Jews. So Sholem Aleichem, at that time, who had lost all his money, was writing to Chekhov, to Tolstoy, to a lot of other writers, and said, we want to make a journal for the benefit of the victims of Kishinev. And he succeeded in that, and that is actually the journal. I actually am the proud owner of one of the very few copies of that journal. It's actually very small. It's very fragile, so this is it. I'll just put a picture up there. And Chekhov wrote back to Sholem Aleichem. Chekhov wrote to Sholem Aleichem and said, I cannot write something new because I'm very sick, and he actually died the next year. I'm very sick, but you are allowed to reprint some of my other work. And Tolstoy wrote, here's his Russian letter, wrote a letter in Russian and said, I will send you 3 original stories. And this magazine sold very well, and the fund was made available to the victims of the Kishinev pogrom. So extraordinary. So now, at that moment in 1903, the moment of the real intense fear among the Jews, we have the Russian writers come and say, okay, we stand with you. In 1881, And that is what really led to a flood also of Jewish intellectuals leaving Russia. That was not the case. In 1881, Jewish intellectuals did not come out, Russian intellectuals did not come out in support of the Jews. In 1903, that was actually very different. Okay. Outbreak of the Russian-Japanese War. More Jews get drafted than anybody else. And then in 1905, the Constitution is proclaimed. In intense pogroms, Sholem Aleichem and his family moved from they live in Kiev, moved from their place in Kiev to a hotel, to the Hotel Imperial, and they witness the pogroms from the window of the hotel. And it is so shocking to them, it is so upsetting to them, that then after the pogroms had subsided, they were raging there in October, there was actually over 660 pogroms throughout. I mean, in Odessa, it was in Odessa. So our guy Mendele lived in Odessa. It was a 4-day pogrom. A 4-day pogrom right outside his home in the Moldavanka, and he only survived because he was not given away by the janitor. He and his family were hiding in the basement behind old school furniture. He was the director of a school, and that's how he survived. So after the pogrom was over, Mendele with his family sailed to Constantinople and went then from there to Geneva. And Sholem Aleichem and his family, with his many children, and 6 children by that time, were also leaving the country, sold the furniture at a loss, and just basically got out. There was an enormous flood of people. Also went to Lemberg. Okay, the pogroms were basically white males, working class people. We have something like that. We have discontent. We understand that. I don't have to explain it. Okay, so that is the situation. Our man, we just finished about Sholem Aleichem. So he gets out. He goes to Lemberg. He tries to make it in theater. He can't manage it. He goes to America. He fails to make a career in America in the Yiddish theater. He goes back to Geneva. He lives in Geneva, but he misses Russia. And then he does something which he wasn't going to do. At that time, he's a celebrity in Europe. He goes on a reading tour through the Palo settlement, and he is celebrated everywhere. People come out. He gives 4-hour, 5-hour readings, and in 1908, he's in Baranovich. And in the Baranovich train station, when he collapses with a hemorrhage, and he is diagnosed with open tuberculosis. He spends the rest of his life basically in Italy, and it's only after the First World War breaks out he goes back to America, and he's so sick already that he dies. So that's a career. The stories in the railway stories were written after he's diagnosed with tuberculosis, and they are written in Italy, sitting at the Riviera. Okay? But he is full of longing. He is very poor. He is so poor that he is over his head in debt. As you know, the story is that he gambled away all his money in the stock exchange, so you're familiar with that. He is intensely poor, and the reason why he had a second wind of writing was because his friends got together, and he is poor because he doesn't have the rights to his work. And they buy the rights to his work for about 3,000 rubles and give it to him as a gift. And so basically, for the first time in 1909, he experiences some sort of financial relief, and that led to the exuberance of the stories that you have. So now you have all of the background, and now we'll do the work. Okay, and first up, for me, I think Beverly asked me particularly to pay attention to that one. I would love to talk about the 2 stories by Chekhov. So we have now about an hour to do that. Okay, we got Slavuta out of the way. We have 2 fantastic stories. They are absolutely exquisite by our man Chekhov, who was extraordinary in his own way, grew up poor. By the time he writes these stories, I'm not going to go through his bio because you can do it yourself. By 1896, he wrote the play Seagull, and it flopped in St. Petersburg. In 1897, he's himself diagnosed with open tuberculosis. And in 1898, the newly formed Moscow Art Theater puts on Chaika, puts on Seagull, and it becomes a huge success. At that time, Chekhov is already fairly sick. In 1899, he moves, you see this dacha, Chekhov, he moves to this dacha in Yalta. This is his door. You see Anton Pavlovich Chekhov, and that is an old postcard of the place in which he lived in Yalta. And here he is with Maxim Gorky, whom he supported. Gorky was rejected from the Academy of Literature or something, and Chekhov said, well, if you don't take this guy because you think he's a revolutionary, I'm going to resign. That was 1903. So absolutely extraordinary. So here is Chekhov in 1900. Okay, now Meyer. Tina, and the other story is Kutavochita. What you make of that? I know it's very hard to, you remember the story. It's about a guy. Let's go talk about Meyer first, if you would. 1886. It's a very, very early story of Chekhov's. You know, his father was a shopkeeper. His grandfather was still a serf. He was born in Taganrog on the Sea of Azov on the northern tip. Great fortress like Odessa. Great city. Father goes bankrupt. Chekhov at age 16 is all alone at Taganrog, finishes gymnasium, and then starts studying medicine in 1879, and starts to be in literary circles and starts writing short stories, and gets co-opted by an anti-Semitic editor to write for the New Times, and this story appears in an anti-Semitic paper, but that's not what it is. So we have the story of a guy who comes to collect his debt. And then what happens? So what do you make of that? How does the story work? Great story. How did you yeah, John, start us off.
A lieutenant wants to get married, he needs money to pay for dowry, he goes to a cousin to get the money the cousin uses to borrow the money, so you have to go to this woman who's a seductress, but he didn't say that, to get the money. The Jewish woman, first she meets him in a nightgown, we're not even sure what's going on.
So it's a very expensive Chinese dressing gown, right? I just a Chinese dressing gown. Actually, I want to put a picture up that I think is just like her. This guy also went to America. Yehuda Epstein, 1900. Is that extraordinary? Is that exquisite? I think it's an exquisite painter. Okay, so that's my, actually, when I read the story, I was thinking of this painting. Okay, so, all right. So who's this lady? What's happening with that lady?
Well, they have a fist fight. Well, they're not a fist fight. They have a duel. She takes the IOU and she keeps it in one of her pockets, and he tries to wrestle it to get the IOU. And then his cousin says, how did how come we couldn't get it? And he had already stayed the night in her place. So the question is, she's some kind of seductress, but they both the lieutenant and his cousin both have a sexual relationship with her. And she's some kind of a madam, and at the end of the story, she has like a whole group of men, and then they 20 people you don't even know, they're all playing music.
Okay, so are we, I'm going to have to take my glasses now because I want to. Are we just dealing, you remember, we had two types of Jews we met before. We had the exploitative guy, okay? So think of the Turgenev story, right? So are we dealing here with the exotic Jewess who's a seductress, or what we're dealing here with? Who's this person? I mean, is this an anti-Semitic story? Is this a romantic story? What, David, help us out here.
It's something that is lacking in their lives. She is like the opposite of the bourgeois existence that they're living. She's alive in a way that their regular lives are not.
She is alive. She's a live wire. Okay, she's a live wire. Okay, she is free. She's free, and they're not free. Do you remember I started out saying on the one hand you have Saltykov and they're all shriveled. Okay, what is the kind of life that these guys are living? You're getting actually a description of that.
Same as the first book we read.
The first book we read is an extension of the first book we read, which is The Family Golubov by Saltykov-Shchedrin. We are meeting people who live just like that. They are all married, they feel all good about themselves, and they are incredibly bored. Okay? They're incredibly bored. And they gotta go do something. Right? So, how did she get to be who she is? Okay, but listen to this, okay? I want you, okay, so we understand that we got this exotic woman and they all fall for her. We would all fall if you're bored and you're a guy, or if you're a girl and you're bored and you see this attractive guy, let's say, I don't know, don't think it's on Brad Pitt, or I don't know, maybe it's not so attractive anymore, but you figure it out, okay? So, you know, you want adventure. And it ends up with all these guys being in this living room, and they are, but they're embarrassed to talk to each other. So you do get the sense you have a brothel, do you not? Okay, with the Chinese and with the decadence and with the flowers and the blah, blah. Okay, so do you have a positive sense or do you have a negative sense of our pretty woman? Do you like her? Do you feel it's negative? Do you feel attractive to her? And then I want to read you a description of her room, and then I want you to say again what you're saying.
The pervasive smell of, what was the flower?
Jasmine.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
decadence.
bothering me.
That's bothering you.
Because in all these stories that we read, the Jews are always accused of smelling of garlic.
Right.
It's just,
Right.
And their diet was so poor that was a
Right.
staple.
Let's make a connection to Sholem Aleichem right away, okay?
Right.
In the gymnasia
Yeah, I was
story,
wondering
the
if-
teacher, one second, the teacher makes the student decline the word garlic in Russian, which is exactly. So you go instrumentalny padesh, I don't know, that's instrumentalny padesh, mitany padesh, whatever padesh it is. Okay, that's Misha's case. And you say all those with the oy and the on and whatever the ending is. Okay, he has to decline that. The word garlic. Okay, you're exactly right on that. Okay, Shalom Aleichem, of course, it's funny.
I just wondered if the scent of jasmine was to, in Chekhov's mind, to cover up the...
She says it. The girl says it. The girl, right, you read it, right? Yeah.
She talks about it because
Like you would have expected me to
That
say
is
that
exactly
garlic, but I
That's right. So Chekhov knows that and makes Susanna Moiseyevna say precisely that. Okay, you expected it to smell like garlic, so you know, basically I'm using all these flowers. Okay, that's one. Okay, the sense of that garlic, and it's wonderful that Chekhov plays with that and actually says. You actually turns this against the Russian readers reading it. This is not written for Jews, it's written for Russian readers. You have to now read this as a Russian reader, and you feel that you are, you know, you've been discovered, you've been undone, you found out something about you. Okay, but listen to this description of her drawing room. Okay, the drawing room in which he was standing now was richly furnished and had pretensions to luxury and style. There were dark bronze dishes with patterns in relief, views of Nice and the Rhine, on the tables old-fashioned scenes, sconces, Japanese statuettes, but all this striving after luxury and style only emphasized the lack of taste, which was glaringly apparent in the gilt cornices, the gaudy wallpaper, the bright velvet tablecloths, the common oleographs in heavy frames. The bad taste of the general effect was the more complete from the lack of finish and the overcrowding of the room, which gave one a feeling that something was lacking and that a great deal should have been thrown away. It was evident that the furniture had not been bought all at once, but had been picked up at auctions and other favorable opportunities. Heaven knows what taste the lieutenant could boast of, but even he noticed one characteristic peculiarity about the whole place, which no luxury or style could efface: a complete absence of all trace of womanly, careful hands, which, as we all know, give a warmth, poetry, and snugness to the furnished room. There was a chilliness about it as one finds in waiting rooms, at stations, in clubs, and the foyers at theaters. Okay, so this is Constance Garnett, who of course is British, and I think she gets it so right. She's a fantastic translator. This is a characterization of Susanna Moiseievna, is it not? Right? Are we not all characterized by the way in which really, what does Chekhov do in here?
I think it's like, the men try to put the woman in the box and she's totally out of it.
That's right. Okay, so on the surface, it is a put down. But he says right there, heaven knows what taste the lieutenant could boast of, but even he noticed. Okay, this is the lieutenant noticing, right?
Yeah.
So it gets complicated really well. He is expecting, and this is how he goes, he's expecting a bereaved lady, father just died, and wealthy, and all the commonplace stuff that bores the hell out of these guys, which is why they're going. And what they get is sexy decadence. What they get is freedom. What they get is spark. So that too, I would say, is a stereotype of the Jews. It's a positive stereotype. The freedom, the sexiness, the cosmopolitanness, the I don't care. But the one thing that's serious
It's classless.
is what?
It's classless. There's no
Classless, the classlessness, the not caring. You just put the junk in there because people expect it to be something expensive.
That's a put down.
That's a put down. Is it put down, right? That you bought it at auction, like you noticed, right? Bought at auction, not all in one place. You try to, go to an estate sale. I love estate sales. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, I just bought the land at the estate sale. I think it's great, fabulous. Anyway, so like that. Okay. What else?
But there's one thing that defies the stereotype, that is, she's not afraid of him.
She's not afraid. Excellent. She challenges him. She wrestles. She seduces him. Not he, her. She is a seductress. That also, and that goes all very scarily close to her stereotype, maybe?
But she says, this is my fortune, you could strangle me and take it off. But you're not going to strangle me, are you? So it's like, she feels, she has power.
She has power. That's right. She has power, and she seduces him to stay there, and he goes there all of his own will. Nobody tells him that he should go there. Okay, we need to move on to the next story, but I want to give you the key to that story now.
The other thing, she's fun. She's always
She's fun.
laughing.
Absolutely. She's interesting, she's fun, she's sparkly. She's not like flat soda. She's a Coke bottle you just opened. She's extraordinary. She is peppy. Okay, at that time, yeah.
I think it sort of turns on its head. He goes in with this feeling of superiority because
Yep.
he is the white Russian and she is the Jew who lends
Absolutely.
the money. And at the end, he is her servant,
Yeah.
waiting for her to dine to pay attention to him. And he realizes he's just one of many and how he's been manipulated.
Right. We do get one scary image though, which I did not really figure out, okay? So when the cousin comes, the married guy, so not the young guy's already there, and he's sitting withdrawn in other room, and there's a plump Jew talking to him. So I'm not sure what that's all about. Remember the last scene? There's a plump little Jew talking to him, a little bit flabby, sitting down at a desk.
Yeah, because I think he's doing her business.
They're doing a what?
I think he's now doing her business. He has other Jews. So he's
Oh,
now
that's
doing
very
her
clever.
business.
I couldn't solve that. That is very clever. Oh, he's doing a business. Oh, that makes sense.
So he's already crossed the border. He's
Sorry, right.
becoming.
He's not gonna leave, right?
That's it. And another disease is like the Jewish disease almost of the business. He's not part of it.
Amazing.
So I don't know.
It is an amazing story. So I don't think it's an anti-Jewish story. I think it's a story in praise of the peppiness of the Jews and how special they are.
But
I thought that
she
should
winds up with everybody's money. So that again is the stereotype of the Jew and the money.
No, because the cousin said, did the cousin not say she gave it to him? The cousin said, and then she just took it out of the cupboard. She's very free with money. This is not about money. It looks as if it were about money, but it's really not. That's my sense, it's really not. Does the cousin get the money? But it's a little bit ambivalent, I think. It's ambiguous, because he says, oh, then she went to the cupboard and just gave it to me. But I think in the end, it doesn't look like he actually got the money. But
He
maybe
doesn't
they
care.
want,
He doesn't care.
he doesn't take it.
No, he doesn't care.
Ah.
He said it was worth the money, it was worth the experience. So I think money is not.
Yeah,
the
but when you get to that, you are back to paying for the experience, and that's not good. But you see what's good about Chekhov? It's the one and it's the other. You see, if he says, oh, you know, it's worth my experience, but that empowers, but you see, that's the other thing, that empowers the guy. If the guy can feel in a position that they pay for it, then they come out on top. If she gives them the money, she comes out on top. I mean, that's what's fun about it. It's extraordinary because it plays with the stereotypes and at the same time it undercuts them. Okay, now the key to the story is that Chekhov was for a year and a half very much in love with a Jewish woman. And her name was Yevdokia Isakova Evros. And I looked her up. Okay, she in 1886 there was sort of engagement. You know, he was like Kafka. He couldn't really be with anybody. It was not for him. And she was a wild card, but he was crazy about her. And so she married in the late 1880s. She married a friend of his, a Jewish guy, Konovitzer. And I looked up if she was real. And I found her on the central database of Shoah victims. She went with her husband to France, and here's her name. You can see Eudoxie Konovitzer, born in 1866, from Moscow, Russia, list of deportation from France, and she was murdered. So that Susanna Moiseyevna did not make it out of France. So I thought that was really sad. Okay. But that is the model, and that's why the model is so positive, because he himself was absolutely smitten with Eudoxie. Okay, before we go to Shalom Aleichem, I want to talk a little bit about the Skripka Wojcic's fiddle, which I think is even better as a story than the other one. I mean, that's also absolutely extraordinary. Okay, Skripka Wojcicka. Okay. Right? Okay, at least I'm instruments right. Okay. Again, from the perspective of, it's a very subtle story, and it's very moving. And it is so, in that way, Chekhov and Shalom Aleichem were so similar. You know, they're so similar. They like real stuff, and they write from the bottom up. They go to the people, and they imagine what it is like to suffer. And it's funny, and at the same time, it's intensely sad. So it's exquisite in that way. Look at me, a little puzzled, David.
I'm just thinking.
Okay, so what's with this? What's with this story? What's with this? We can just start at the end. What does he give him the fiddle? What is the relation of our character, whose name, of course, now I've forgotten? Yaakov. Yeah, of course. Right, not Yaakov. By the way, there's the painting Yaakov and Esau is hanging in Yevdokia's or Susanna Moiseyevna's study. All right. So what's with Rothschild?
Rothschild is a Jew. He's always who Yaakov abuses.
He's got a what?
Jew that Yaakov abuses.
Yeah. Okay.
He was a redhead.
Rothschild is redheaded, right? Yeah, and he has freckles, and he doesn't look very attractive, this Rothschild. Okay, so what's Yaakov's problem?
Yaakov has no soul. He's realized he didn't do anything his whole life.
Okay, so all right, this is like the death of Ivan Illich. Isn't that the death of Ivan Illich?
Except it's worse, because it's like the Jewish stereotype of the money grubber, that everything is measured in terms of dollars and cents.
Yeah.
It's like Solyakov. He keeps counting the money he doesn't have.
Right, he's a Luftmensch. Okay, I mean, if you did not not know, if you did not know that this was a story by Chekhov, you would think this is a story by Shalom Aleichem.
Yes.
It was a tiny town, worse than a village, inhabited chiefly by old people who so seldom died that it was really vexatious. Okay, that kind of contradiction in terms, okay, that is Shalom Aleichem. Okay, it was so seldom died, it was really vexatious. Very few coffins were needed for the hospital and the jail. In a word, business was bad. Okay, a guy who makes money off the misfortune of others in a fun, and this put in a funny way, that's very Shalom Aleichem, but this is Chekhov. Okay, so now we've got this guy, we've got this story person who lives off the death of other people, and no one dies. Not too bad, right? Okay, so we're gonna go to something like that in a second, and then what? Okay, so make this complicated. Come on, this is Chekhov. This is not Shalom Aleichem. Yeah.
And he plays the violin. He plays the violin.
He plays the violin. Okay, but before he plays the violin, he's got a lot of other Taurus. What's his Taurus? What are his Taurus? The wife. Is she Taurus? Come on.
People don't die.
Eh?
People don't die.
People don't die. Okay, that's one, but she dies.
She dies.
Yeah, he makes no money. He doesn't get money. He's got a desk. He doesn't
He has
learn
to
anything.
pay for the coffin out of
140
his own
copies for
pocket.
markup. Okay, good. All right, good. But okay, so then I think it will be easier to start with the wife. Okay, let's do the wife. It actually is really written in scenes. You can actually really make a play out of that. So because the scenes start very soon. Okay. Let's go with the coffins. He has one problem with coffins. There's one type of coffins he does not want to do. Children's coffins, okay, on page 98. The fact is, I don't like to be bothered with trifles. Guys, this is Chekhov, okay? And what we have here is sublimation, repression, okay? We learn this later. We get the key to that later, okay? It's not trifles. It's because this goes so deep. Because this man is in denial. This is a story about denial. This is about a story who's about exactly like Yudushka in Family Golovhovi. This is a guy who pretends he has no feelings. But the truth of the matter is that the death of his child has hurt him to such a degree that it has made him freeze. He's frozen. He's a frozen guy. He's a frozen guy. And there are two things that get this guy unfrozen. The one is the wife. When she dies, he is truly moved.
Moved, and then the dreams that she's telling.
Right.
And what?
And the second one, he has these dreams. And when he has bad dreams, he has one friend. He takes the fiddle and he sleeps next to it and he just touches the strings. And that description of a man 70 years old, haunted by a deep hurt that he has not worked through, that is buried in himself, that made him freeze, whose companion, who is also hurt and sleeps in another room and dies before him, whose substitute companion is a violin, whose strings he touches to hear the sound, is extraordinarily moving. That is great art. To write like this without it being sentimental, but so that it makes you hurt, that's extraordinary. That's really extraordinary. Shalom Aleichem can do this too. That too connects those two guys. And the reason they can write like this is just because they experienced it. They had this kind of loss, and they lived this kind of life, and so you believe it. Okay, so we now know, because we have the key in the dream, the mother gives us the key, the wife gives us the key. Do you remember? Da-da-da. And then subconsciously, unconsciously, he goes down to the river, the willow, and all of a sudden he unfreezes. What are his thoughts then? He unfreezes. He's thawing right there.
Regret.
Yeah, I mean, he was always counting his losses, right? The losses that weren't any losses because they weren't real. Now, for the first time, he's got real losses. You know, you can really see there would have been all this other stuff and all this other stuff. Okay, now you have to do something really important, because you understand that at the beginning, when he's still frozen, view of the Jew, because this is also an explanation by Chekhov of what makes anti-Semitism happen, okay? He has a negative view of the Jew. Okay, he doesn't like this guy. What does he not like about the Jews?
He makes everything sad
He makes everything sad. Why is that a problem for him?
because he's frozen and he can't acknowledge the sadness.
Because he's afraid. He's afraid he will unfreeze. He's afraid that Rothschild will move him to tears, and he resents that, and that's why he hates him. That's extraordinary. Okay? That's an extraordinary description of an effect that the Jews have on someone Russian, which means that it is a positive thing that Chekhov says about the Jews. The Jews are capable of feeling. Where else have you read that in Russian literature? That's astounding. And he makes it because he's writing this for Russians. He's not writing this for us. He's writing this for Russians. He makes this in a very circuitous route, describing a guy who is frozen, afraid of his feelings, and who is hating the others because they will force him to acknowledge the feelings. And at the end, of course, he can, and he gives the fiddle to Rothschild. Extraordinary. So that is really good. And that we can see this is someone who is not affected by Russian Orthodoxy, who is not a careerist. All the pathways that we describe for the Slavota do not work for Chekhov because he did not move in that society. He's from Taganrog. He became a physician. He worked with the peasants. He did some clinics. He became sick very early, and he moved out, and he had nothing to do with that establishment. So there's a possibility of being free from that. Wow, it's stunning. I mean, these are stunning stories, and overall, I mean, there are many of them.
Wasn't it also when Rothschild was attacked by people? When he was attacked, people had to feel sorry for him.
Yes, right. But he's not capable at that time yet. When they stick the dog on him, when he's bitten by the dog, that is the first scream, really, that pierces him. Right. Okay. So we got 20 minutes for Shalom Aleichem. Okay, but it's very necessary that we do all this because after all, it's supposed to be a history course also. Shalom Aleichem in English is not Shalom Aleichem. So I had real issues with this translation. I actually just want to remind you how good I am, okay? The people who won the prizes at chocolate bars, I have the chocolate bars that people did not come here. Remember? Okay, I said, okay, you get 2 Swiss chocolate bars, one for Jeannie, one for Karen, okay? I'm just, I'm as good as my word. I have them, but they're not here. All right, so just a little bit for you to rest your brains. Okay, I want to discuss, you can pick any story. We can go over it and just analyze the structure. I mean, it's stunning array of stories. Okay, that's Shlomo with his family. I don't know why this neck keeper bothering me. Okay, I'm so sorry. Stop this neck keeper. Well, I'm not there. I dare not touch this because who knows what it's going to do to me. Okay, Shlomo. Okay, is his life. Okay, and this is, I found this, it's extraordinary. In 1948 in Berlin, okay, right after the Holocaust, the first book in Yiddish that was published was Eisenbahngeschichte. Isn't that absolutely bizarre?
With what?
The railroad stories, Eisenbahngeschichte. So this is a Berlin edition of 1948. You can see they're all sitting there talking to each other. See inside of the book. Oh, and this is the, I did not get to, this is the structure of the railroads. You cannot see it because it's too far away. I'm so sorry. This is a system of the railroad. There is, I also don't have a pointer, all the way on top is Kiev, and then it says all places that are mentioned in this book are actually on this railroad map. I will make a photocopy for next time. It just wasn't enough time to run over and make the copies. Okay.
The wife. The wife.
The wife.
That's the story I think we should discuss.
The first one?
There was,
The first one?
no, in the middle. The wife was giving him advice, and he took in 2 orphans. And there was-
Oh! Was it 2 orphans? Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, with the 2 orphans, okay. So we have different types of stories in there. This one happens to be, and there's another one. This one happens to be the type of the Jewish narcissist. Okay, what we have here is a narcissist is telling a story, that it is doesn't pay to be good, is what it's called, right? Right. Well, I did not find that one to be that complex.
Okay, fine, we don't have to find, that's fine.
That's kind of fun. Okay, which story bothered you? I mean, what we can see is precisely what we saw in the drama of Slavuta. Okay, we can see there are different types of stories here. We can see the Jews raking other Jews over the coals. A game of 66, okay? That is exactly like the Chappers in Mendele Michael's firm. Did I do something wrong? In Mendele, the two Chappers who pretend to be Orthodox Jews, okay, and they put him into the Tsar's army. So in the game of 66, okay, a Jew gets cleaned out. So that's a negative thing about Jews. Yes.
How about Elul?
Elul. Okay, that is called Kever Oves. That is very interesting story.
177.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. What do you like about Elul?
Well, I mean,
Okay, so the story in the original is called Kever Oves, Graves of the Fathers. And in Elul, because we're moving into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the minhag is that you go visit the graves of people who are dear to you. Okay, what graves are you?
begins with a couple that just been to the grave.
Right,
But
exactly, and it's in the
grave
train.
of a daughter.
And it's a grave of a daughter, and it's a grave of a daughter. And what happened to that daughter?
The daughter took her life.
The daughter took her own life on account of the book,
Seni.
which is this one. I have everything. It's really crazy. Alzi Bashet Sonin. Sanin. Okay, and this happens to be a Yiddish translation, which was owned by the Max E. and Anna Bornstein Library, Fair Lawn Jewish Center Congregation at Skyim in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. They had the book. I don't know how many people it killed. Okay, all right. So yes. So what's the story about? It seems to be funny.
Well,
But it seems to be funny because it's like weirder. People kill themselves on account of the book. Who's killing themselves on account of the book?
this was
But-
sad, like the sorrows of young people.
Right.
But two girls, a founder's daughter, and this girl. But then they promised not to couldn't live without one another, didn't want to live without one another. That's the strange part. There's something else there that is very dark and disturbing beyond the deaths of these two young girls.
Okay.
Answer
So
the question.
we have something going on before there, which is the hussars or the Russian regiment moves in, and the cantor's daughter falls in love with one of them, and we understand from and is I don't know if that's true. She's pregnant.
They were saying that she went. Just the rumor was spreading.
The rumor was spreading. It may not have been there, okay, and may not have been so, but it may have been so. But anyway, she's in love with a non-Jew. We understand how Shalom Aleichem feels about it. You remember the Chava story in Tevye, which is probably the most powerful of the stories. It's extremely painful, and this is just as painful. But we don't get this from the parents of Chava. We get it from the parents of the friend, who it turns out, Edka is her name. As you said, they cannot live without one another.
They made a pact.
They made a pact, so she is that, and then she has to kill herself also. Hillel Hakim says this is the influence of this book, and in fact, at the beginning, the story gets triggered by a guy who likes to read. Oh, let me tell you about the effect of the book. Okay, Shlomo Ayman happened to hate Arzi Bashev. I mean, he thought it was just like Shomer, the stuff was shown. What's exquisite here is the pain of the mother. It's always in the last line. When she wakes up, she's and calls for him, and he comes over to her to take care of her. At that moment, You have an exquisite description of pain in almost no words, just in the gesture of tenderness, which is very similar to what we just read in Rothschild's fiddle. Exquisite tenderness right here. So there is mockery of the impact of literature, but with a very serious undertone, a very serious acknowledgement of the pain of parents. In that time, Ruth Weiss is always very fond to point that out. Usually, the stories that get told from the perspective of the kids, being in rebellion against the parents. Here is the other way around. It's critical. We usually get the perspective of the parents in Sholem Aleichem being critical of the waste, of the wastefulness of the children. That is a waste. That is not acknowledging what your parents have done for you. There's a second story just like that in that collection, and that is Gymnasium. Right? The lengths to which the parents go to get the kid into the school, where they go, what they do, the humiliation they have to bear from the Russian teacher who makes a kid decline the word garlic in Russian through all the many cases, and there are 6 cases in Russian, and the endings are different in the plural. Okay, so it's like you have to say the word garlic basically 12 times in order to learn that declension. I mean, the humiliation that the parents go through. And he is in gymnasium now, and then what does he do? He throws away his cap. I mean, you're just stunned. You're just stunned. And he tells it as if it were funny. But that is the power of Sholem Aleichem, and that's the same actually in Chekhov, to move you. And then you can't find that funny. I think, Joan, you told me it was, you don't send me an email and said it was funny. I said, Joan, what are you thinking?
No, I was thinking about the train, the slow
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
oh,
The train, when he went to see he went to go to the grist and the kid.
yeah. Now, there are things that are absolutely hilarious, and that mock, of course, the pogromchiks move in one of the extraordinary stories. The pogromchiks move in, they come by train, they get so drunk the day before that they forget that, or the night before they forget to hitch the locomotive. Okay, very similar, very interesting story also about with the galach on the train, with the priest on the train. Okay, the miracle of Hoshana Rabbah. Okay, miracle of Hoshana Rabbah as they're moving, and what's wonderful about the story is when you push the priest to the limit where his life is in danger, the anti-Semitism comes out. Okay, it's sort of like there's a saying in German that man kann Menschen am besten beurteilen, wenn man sie auf der Fassung bringt. Diamonds and human beings can be best assessed when they are broken out of their setting. Okay, that's a rough translation, but that's that way. And he loses his setting, his constraint, the thing that gives him form. He loses that, and that moment you can see the viciousness of the anti-Semite coming. That connects us back to the reality of that we saw in the drama of Saluta. Okay. What about the first story? Go ahead. I can't let you go without that. My favorite story actually is Nancy Barhanovich. I think the other one, pure Sholem Aleichem is the second story, the happiest man in Kodling. Wow.
That is a very touching story.
That is, the man is happy, looks happy, and he has a child that is sick to death and is happy because the doctor said, I'm going to come look at it. Extraordinary. The neediness of the Jews has never been captured any better. There's no sentimentality here. There's no nostalgia. There is a deep understanding of what it is to feel emotions intensely, which is exactly what Chekhov picked up about the Jews. Feeling emotions so intensely that you are happy because you get to bring something to your sick child. That's extraordinary to convey that. Yeah.
At the other extreme, there's the story if you don't like it, go climb a tree, or it has maybe something like that. The next to last story, where the man has...
Wolf McNucknessel. Yes, that is another narcissist story. It's related to the story of the guy who has the two orphans, and he's so dismissive of the girl that he resents that the orphan boy gets married to her, but the wife gets it. Okay, and this one, a guy comes to Kiev because he's sick. He feels sick. He wants to see a doctor. Okay, he goes to his brother, who has a residency permit. Okay, all right. Pogrom happens, or actually razzias happen. What happens for razzia in English? Yeah. Raid. Okay, razzia. Raid is announced. Raid comes. Okay, what happens?
He says, "Quick, you pretend to be me, and I'll pretend to be you," which is a totally absurd idea. All it does is put his brother in jeopardy and gets him off the hook.
It's like the Abbott and Costello routine.
Right.
Give me 20 for 5. Here, you got 2 5, give me your 20. I got to give you two 5s. Okay,
Right.
then like 10 went south or something. It's like that. He's trying, because he talks fast, he's trying to put one over on him, and therefore puts his own brother in jeopardy. I mean, it's stunning. The selfishness, okay? So you have intensity of feeling in the happiest man from Courtney, and you have intense selfishness, you have betrayal, you have carelessness. I mean, it's not the Jews are not coming out looking, smelling like a rose right here with Shalom and do that.
They come in all shapes and sizes.
Come in all shapes and sizes. Okay, with that, last comment.
When I was reading this, I was just giggling. It reminded me, I was reading it sounded like I was listening to Jackie Mason.
Jackie Mason, of course.
There's so much that was like...
What you can't say, that's not such a bad comment, okay? Because the power of language is involved here. These are people who know that when they talk fast, they can use it as a weapon. And they'll talk over anybody. And that is precisely, look at the effect of the guy with Isaac and Isaac. Okay, how his lawyer throws him out. He could make business there, but the guy is so desperate that he, on the one hand, is so desperate he uses it because he has to talk like me all the time, and and basically drives him bananas. The woman, the two concurrenten, the two rivals. Okay, look how she talks at the end. But that's not, in this case, her suffering is so intense. And she has no other outlet that she needs to talk and complain all the time. I mean, it's not just complaining. Does anybody know the monologue, The Pot? Where a woman comes to the rabbi and complains and wants to ask him if the pot is still kosher because she put a little bit of milk in the chicken soup. And what comes really out is that she has a son who's sick and da-da-da-da-da. And at the end, the rabbi is so overwhelmed he faints. It's like that effect. It's a very powerful effect. And Jackie Mason does something very similar. He wants to assert his power over the audience and is really just putting people in thrall. It's not as funny in Shalom Aleichem because the weapon is used as an outgrowing of intense suffering most of the time. Right? So it's more complicated. But some of it, but of course it is used, he wanted to be funny. And he did use it to fun effect, but we on our end are so aware of the pain now because we cannot be in denial. The people who were reading that were finding it very funny because they were in a position of Yaakov because they had to be in denial because this was their own lives. We only see the suffering, so we don't get the fun so much anymore. But in Yiddish it is very, very funny, I must say. All right, I need to close because I have been trained to close at 8:30 sharp, 9:30 sharp. You've been wonderful. This was great fun for me. I see you next time. No Punim, but I will send you a link and the text of Bialik, City of Slaughter. Please read Jabotinsky, the novel, The Fight. If you can, look into his book, the founding of the Self-Defense League. We, for the first time, after the Kishinev pogrom, get Jews who are banding together to form self-defense. And Jabotinsky is the one who initiated that, and the Bible stories. All right, thank you very much. Um,